Welcome to part 3 of our series on how to handle challenging building cavity returns. In our first 2 lessons, we covered the overall technical challenges and the advanced sealing processes your repair team will need to follow when tackling them. Today, we'll now discuss selling return sealing, the work scope, pricing, and sales communication challenges, and how to overcome them. There are 3 broad levels to how AeroSeal dealers offer to tackle complex building cavity return leakage in the classic basement style homes. The first, let's call it the bronze level, is to ignore the returns entirely and only AeroSeal the supply side. We at AeroSeal don't encourage only sealing the supply side. Now, one exception, of course, would be if the existing return system is abandoned and reducted, in which case you'd still want to AeroSeal the new return duct system. The second approach, let's call it the silver level, is in my mind the correct minimum solution approach. It is to AeroSeal only the supply side, but to also include at least some hand sealing of the return side. The primary focus is still to AeroSeal and certify the supply side. Now, since we don't hook up the machine to the return side, there's no measurement of the sealing reduction made by the hand sealing done on that return side. The third approach, call it the gold level, is to AeroSeal both sides. AeroSealing the supply side is still the main focus of the project. However, the project also includes a serious best effort to also seal the return side using AeroSeal and hand sealing. 2 seal reports are generated showing separately the percentage reductions achieved on each side. We'll spend most of our time on explaining this preferred approach in the rest of this lesson. But first, let's look at the pros and cons of only sealing the supply side. The bronze AeroSeal solution carries the lowest investment while also delivering the least results. Remember, if you're only sealing the supply side in the typical basement style home, you have to make sure the client understands that the benefit will be pretty much limited to the improved temperature comfort that comes from increasing the supply airflow, basically from getting the conditioned air to go where it's supposed to go. If the returns aren't being sealed at all, it's kind of inappropriate to promise much in the way of improved indoor air quality, less dust, or better humidity control. If only the supply side is sealed, there will likely be some energy savings, especially in cooling, but not as much as there would be if the returns were also sealed. Remember, in most of these basement style houses, it's the return side that is likely to actually leak to the attics, the outside walls, and eventually to outdoors. On the other hand, the most common homeowner problem that drives the AeroSeal sale in this type of frost belt house is usually inadequate cooling of the second floor, or poor heating or cooling of a family room or master bedroom suite at the far end of the house from the equipment. Sealing the supply exclusively does deliver the main or perhaps only benefit many homeowners are actually looking for. So making supply side sealing the main focus of the project, no matter what work is done to the return side, does make a lot of sense. Another safety issue you must respect is that in the typical basement style home, if you only seal the supply side, you increase the risk of having the unsealed basement level return leakage now causing negative air pressure in the basement. Now, the potential was always there, but with the supply side leaks sealed, there's nothing to counteract the suction caused by the return leaks. This can increase building envelope air infiltration into the basement and air exfiltration in the main living area up above, and all the attendant problems from higher levels of air exchange. But the biggest concern is potentially causing dangerous backdrafting of any atmospherically vented furnaces or water heaters in the basement. I'd like to point out that this phenomenon, negative pressure in the basement, and the risk, isn't just related to duct sealing. It's likely that zoning systems nationwide are probably putting far more families at risk because in the summer, the basement zone supply side dampers are staying closed since no cooling is called for. But the undampered basement return grills, plus any return leakage, are still drawing from the basement level. Now, there are multiple ways to deal with the basement negative pressure issue, starting with simply having the technical training on how to test for it and being able to explain the possibility and likely solutions to the customer. In many homes, especially if any of the basement is finished and intentionally conditioned, a really simple option is to price ahead of time a pressure balancing passive transfer grill that connects the basement to upstairs, often in the basement door. If it turns out not to be needed, you just don't bill for it. Now that's actually what I did in my own house, which still has return leakage in the metal ductwork in the fully conditioned basement. For you techno nerds watching, I was able to reduce my worst case basement negative pressure by 90%, from negative 5 pascals down to negative 0.5 pascals by simply cutting in an 8x30 transfer grill that connects my front hallway to my basement in the split level. Now the next level up, call it the silver option, is to aeroseal the ducted supplies and to also hand seal the most critical return side leaks in the work scope. These would typically be at least any accessible leaks behind the return grills that lead up to the attic and between the floors. You'd use mastic and caulking and sometimes some blocking like thermopan or scraps of ductboard. If the return grills have been removed anyway to do duct cleaning, return side hand sealing of just what you can get at through the return grill openings adds a few man hours to the job. While it's not as effective as injecting AeroSeal into the entire return wall cavity network, this hand sealing of what I could get at through the return grills is actually what I chose to do in my own house. Making at least some effort to seal return leaks that pull in outside air allows you to expand the claimed benefits to include greater comfort and energy savings and healthier indoor air. Here's some situations where this silver level of service might make sense. 1. If you're a brand new dealer, or if your technicians are in need of extra technical training in order to be able to confidently handle panned returns and building cavity return systems, you could offer this approach until you get good at aerosealing the return side. 2, it could be offered as a lower investment option, maybe the good level in a good, better, best hierarchy, especially if the client's biggest concern is poor airflow and discomfort. And 3, it may be the best recommendation when the entire basement sealing is finished and your crew won't be able to hand seal many of the basement level return leaks or undertake the divide and conquer process without cutting into drywall. Note that if the scope of work for the return side sealing doesn't include sealing all the basement level panning and metal ductwork, you still should address the potential negative pressure issue. Let's now take a short review and discussion break, and when we come back we'll expand on the recommended gold approach for the selling comprehensive sealing of building cavity returns. So the third common and AeroSeal recommended approach is what we could call the gold level. You include a best efforts hand sealing and AeroSealing of the return side along with AeroSealing the supply side. Typically, dealers who offer this promise to get as much of the return side sealed as can be done on the same workday. They stop prior to any cutting open of walls or ceilings and patching of drywall. For this to go over well, the core principle to explain to your customer is that when building cavity returns are present, the main project focus is sealing their supply side in order to get the conditioned air to where it's supposed to go. The biggest benefits they are certain to receive are improved supply side airflow, better ability to air balance, and improved comfort. Next, explain that AeroSeal is a technology that seals ducts. Wall and floor cavities used to carry return air are not true ducts. They need to understand that the return side of their system is probably about half actual metal ductwork, what they can see in the basement, and half building cavities. Removing a return grill and having them look inside while you explain it all is very helpful. Explain that the AeroSeal process is designed to seal typical small gaps and cracks in ductwork. Although it can sometimes seal bigger gaps, it is expected to only reliably seal leaks up to approximately 5/8 of an inch. Explain that this reasonable limitation isn't usually a problem on ducted systems, and that in fact most of the leakage in their return wall cavities that actually communicate to the attic or the outside walls is the drywall to wood gaps and all the wiring holes, which AeroSeal can seal. Explain that the scope of work includes sealing any bigger holes that are accessible by hand, but that any big holes that are inaccessible, like hidden by drywall in their walls and ceilings, might pose a problem. Explain that the return side process outlined in Lesson 2 is included in the standard scope of work, up to the point where any surgery that might be needed to access the bigger hidden holes. This standard return sealing process is thrown in kind of for free as a best effort while we are here all day anyway angle. A lot of it is done while the machine is sealing their supply side. This explanation helps ensure the client doesn't expect a discount in cases where the standard allotted amount of time and effort doesn't make a significant enough return side reduction. The client needs to be made aware that while the standard scope of work usually makes a major reduction in return leakage, in some cases hidden big holes will either mean that the achieved percent reduction is modest, or in some cases that the AeroSeal portion of the return seal may not even be possible. At that point, their lead AeroSeal technician will have completed a very thorough understanding of what's going on and will explain their options. Now, we all know homeowners do not like uncertainty when they're buying stuff. They really are looking for guaranteed results, certainty that they will get value for their money. So that's your challenge, is to get that across. This is where it's really helpful to have two separate seal certificates. Some dealers explicitly guarantee an 80 or even 90% minimum reduction on the hard ducted supply side. This sounds really good to the homeowner. Then you make it clear that at the standard price for the standard scope of work, there is no guarantee of a particular percentage reduction on the return side. I'll give you some tips on how to formulate various AeroSeal guarantees in Section 3. Once you have developed a track record sealing building cavity returns in your market, you can then lay out what might happen during their return sealing by reviewing what your recent history has been on houses with the same challenge. For example, imagine that in the last 10 building cavity return systems, your standard scope of work achieved over 75% reduction on 3 houses. Imagine that on 3 more, you achieved between a 50% and 75% reduction. So, reasonably good results were achieved in 6 out of 10 houses without any extra work or extra charge. Those homeowners got great value. On 3 of the remaining 4, you were able to start sealing, but the system stopped sealing, it flatlined, after say an average of only a 35% reduction. It means there's big hidden holes. And finally, on the last one, the hidden inaccessible leakage was so great that no matter what the guys did, they couldn't even get enough pressure to start AeroSealing. So, assuming the lead tech could figure out what needed to be done to do better, we have 4 out of the 10 where additional work was proposed to cut into drywall and install blocking at extra expense. And say that half of those clients, 2 families, agreed to do that and pay perhaps $500 to $1,000 as a change order for you to cut in, seal, and have your drywall guy come in later to patch and sand and paint the patch white. But the other 2 families chose to just let it ride and stop at what was included for the quoted price. Now, here's a little insight, by the way. In a case where the system simply couldn't build up enough pressure to start, and the client chooses to not proceed with digging any deeper and having you cut into drywall to make it possible for the AeroSeal machine to run, remember, when your technicians unplug the return openings, they should use mastic or caulking to seal any small accessible gaps in the cavities which leak up into the attic that you were hoping AeroSeal might have been able to get to. Turns out we couldn't turn it on. It's not as good as AeroSeal, but a reasonable alternative when pressure couldn't build up and the client won't invest more than the standard amount. Again, we want to deliver value to the customer. Now, this kind of historical information, like the last 10 jobs we just discussed, that'll give your clients a better handle on what to expect and keep you from eating any jobs, doing free extra work, or being expected to give them a discount due to miscommunication. Let them know that this overall approach, having a standard scope of work limited to what can be done in the day without surgery, allows you to offer the most economical standard pricing rather than charging more on all the jobs just in case they turn out to need extra unforeseen repair and redecorating work. Now, if they want zero uncertainty and want a guaranteed reduction for the return side as well, you do have a couple of options. If you are very experienced at doing their style of house and are confident that one way or another your crew can fix it, you might be able to give them a firm not to exceed figure for added blocking and patching repairs and a firm guarantee of what you'll get on the return side. That's sort of how roofers handle this challenge. The roofing contract usually specifies that if rotten roof sheathing is discovered during the re-roof, the extra carpentry work will be billed using a pre-agreed formula, and to avoid dispute, before and after photos are taken of the rot that was discovered when the old shingles came off and of the new roof sheathing that was installed before the new shingles went down. Now, here's another tactic. You could put a pause on the AeroSeal sale and quote a fee to have a senior tech come to do an in-depth assessment, including a duct blaster test and complete inspection by snaking in a duct camera. I'd split the duct blaster test at the equipment so that you know in advance how leaky just the return side is. Then you'll know exactly what to quote to guarantee a certain reduction on the return side and eliminate their uncertainty. Now, the thing is though, the extra money they'll pay to have that testing and inspection visit, which by the way, I wouldn't make it refundable or creditable, that could have gone a long way towards any extra repairs if they were needed. And if the normal scope of work can achieve a good reduction, they just wasted the money spent on all the testing and in-depth inspection. Now, another little wrinkle, since few HVAC or duct cleaning companies or solar companies do drywall repair in-house, the cost of returning the patched area back to normal can be an unknown that keeps people from going ahead. One of our dealers in Minnesota shared with me that he lucked out and found a small painting and drywall contractor who would do a standard ceiling patch and paint for the typical holes they make in the first floor ceilings. They have a lot of 2 stories with missing headers in between the floors for a flat rate of only $300. The dealer just hands out the drywaller's card, the homeowner retains him directly. The dealer could then price out their part doing the opening up and blocking surgery pretty reasonably as long as the client gave them a go-ahead while they were still on the job. If a building cavity return client simply won't accept any of the options and the overall process I've just described, they really want certainty, then I recommend that you refocus their attention on the silver option, where you aeroseal their supplies and just do some hand sealing of their return side. In conclusion, if you have building cavity returns in your market, by following this basic process, both on the technical side and the sales communication side, it is possible to tackle them with minimal uncertainty or risk. While AeroSeal wasn't originally really designed for this situation, it turns out that following this process is hands down the most effective way to fix building cavity returns profitably. And your clients will appreciate the added benefits that come from sealing both sides. Thanks for being an AeroSeal dealer. We'll see you on the next lesson.